Throughout history, America has shown its desperation to remain at the top of the food chain. Hell, they'd even try to be the food chain itself if they could. The constant need for military improvements has shown us the good and the bad of what and who America really is. From cat espionage to bear test pilots, the stories get even weirder. But today, we are going to be talking about Project X-Ray, one of the most destructive potential weapons of warfare to ever exist. This would be the story of the time when the United States military would strap incendiary bombs to bats in the hopes to level an entire Japanese city. Enough talk though, my name is Eric Pollo. Welcome back to another history class. Let's just get right into it. An idea such as this one would arise from a dental surgeon from Irving, Pennsylvania by the name of Lytle S. Adams. You could also call him a man of inventions because he tried to make a fried chicken vending machine, a non-stop mailing system, the bat bombs, and aerial reforestation seed bomb. Because, you know, after we burned down a whole city, let's just go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of grass on it to make all the pain go away, right? But anyways, from the outside, this guy just seemed like a man with weird ideas. He himself went on to say that bats were the lowest form of animal life and that they were, quote, created by God to await this hour to play their part in the scheme of free human existence. Yeah, this guy should be trusted. Not only that, he knew that most bats were faster and stronger than most birds. And when bats are exposed to extremely cold temperatures, they go into hibernation. So it would make the transportation and putting the bombs on the bats itself 10 times easier. Regardless, he had an idea, and this man wanted to see it in action. But how would a man with no military connections make a mass weapon like this without seeming like a domestic terrorist? Oh shit, he somehow knows First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. It's about to get interesting. So he would send over his ideas to her. She would then pass it along to Franklin Roosevelt, who, if you live under a rock or you're just not American, is the 32nd president of the United States of America. And after reading all of what Lytle had to say, he would send it all to his generals. Even sending in a letter, this man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into. And skipping its early development history, the military would figure out how they would need to do this, what resources they would need, and they would get themselves established. So the United States military would choose the Mexican free-tailed bat because of its speed and its strength compared to other bats. They would also decide to use napalm due to their main target, which I'm gonna get to in just a minute. And they would also learn how to secure the bombs onto the bat itself. But let's go away from the story and give you a little bit of insight. The date is 1943, and the Japanese had previously attacked Pearl Harbor roughly 2 years ago. So the necessity for American revenge is still at an all-time high. Piecing together what I've previously said, the Americans would hope to use this device on a Japanese town, which at this point, Japanese towns are primarily made out of nothing but wood. So just one napalm bombing run would do a lot of damage. Okay, so now imagine 1,000 napalm strikes within a 20 to 40 mile radius. That would be catastrophic. So the idea in theory would have 1,000 bats loaded up into a plane, drop from a cylinder cage that would open up at a certain altitude. The bats would then wake up from their hibernation and scatter about. And they would pretty much cover a wide area, going into attics, going into houses, going into everywhere. And after some time, the timer on the incendiary bombs would go off, and you can imagine what would happen next. Now that you have the picture, let's get back into it. The first of these tests would take place on May 15th of 1943 at Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico. From the jump, everyone was excited about this idea. You had generals and officers from all three branches of the military there. Not only that, but you had your normal troops, and of course, the man who started it all, Lytle S. Adams. And the first of these tests would be fairly simple. They would drop about 250 bats from the cage out of a plane just to see how they would do. And let me tell you, it worked wonders. The bats traveled up to 20 miles going into some guy's ranch, infesting everything. I mean, they were in his house, they were in his hay, they were in his barn, they were everywhere. And just imagine being that guy. Like, imagine you're just living your normal day-to-day life, minding your own business, and you look up and you see, oh, what is that? Is that a bird? Is that a plane? No, that's a gang of bats ready to colonize your home. So the first test was technically deemed a success, and a follow-up test was soon to come. This time, the bats would be strapped with bombs. Only the bombs would be deactivated, for obvious reasons, of course. So, same deal. 250 bats would go up in a plane, they would be launched from the cage, they would scatter about. Only, they didn't go that far just because of the extra weight that was on them. Instead, they would scatter around the whole base, going to different places such as the normal buildings, the dorms, and especially under cars. The kicker is, about 15 minutes after the bats were released, somebody had said, hey, the bombs aren't deactivated. Needless to say, half of that base was reduced to rubble and ash. And see, right then and there, the army was like, nope, no, we're done with this. This was a fail. This didn't go well. This was all bad. Conveniently enough, there was a Marine Corps general there by the name of Lewis D. Haven who loved the idea. So much so that he decided to give the operations to the US Navy and the US Marine Corps. Because to him, it wasn't a failure. The bats did exactly what they were supposed to do. They went out and they caused mass destruction. The only reason why they were a failure is because some dumbass on the base didn't know how to do his job and deactivate the bomb. And after taking control of this glorious idea that was just so beautifully demonstrated, they would move their tests to the WWII Proving Ground in Utah to do tests on mock Japanese towns that they had built. And you see, this is where they got to see the real true power of these bat bombs. Okay, so let me explain this to you. Your average napalm bombing run would cause about 400 fires, right? That's a lot. That's a big number. That's still a lot of damage. The bat bombing runs would light up to 4,700 fires, making the bat bombs 12 times more destructive than normal napalm. And let me give you a little bit more insight. The deadliest bombing run in history, it wasn't Nagasaki or Hiroshima. No, matter of fact, it wasn't even by a nuclear weapon. It would be by napalm. This would be called the firebombing of Tokyo, where approximately 300 B-29 bombers would level 16 square miles of a city and would kill an estimated amount of 130,000 people. That is literally more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the initial blast combined. So go ahead and imagine what Tokyo would look like with 12 times that firepower. With their story coming to an end is as abruptly as it stopped, because these tests would only go on for 2 years, never actually seeing combat due to complications of expenses, speed of deployment, and by this time, the atom bomb had already been made, so this use wasn't really practical anymore. In all, the military would spend up to $2 million on this whole project, which in today's money, including inflation, is over $35 billion. With Project X-Ray finally being deemed a failure for practical use, but it doesn't mean they didn't work. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the story of when the United States would strap incendiary bombs to bats and hopes to level an entire Japanese city. A story of failure and success, one that would forever change the thinking of the military and their combat tactics. I hope you all have a good day and a good night. Y'all stay safe. Peace.